what I'm going to do today is talk with you about all the features I can and show you a number of them live inside of Revit. And at the end of today's webinar, if you're like, hey, Sean, you missed X feature that I really wanted to see, let us know that. And what we'll do is do a couple of follow-up webinars on some very specific features or specific workflows in some of the features or discipline-specific segments that really cover those things in detail, just because with all the features we have, and I've only got about 30 minutes, I'm not going to have time to cover all of it. Additionally, real quick note, Revit 2018 obviously includes all the features of previous releases of Revit. So 2017.1, 2017.2. If you did not see those features, again, let us know. And we'll do a follow-up session to kind of talk about what those were. Or certainly in Revit, you can hit the Help button if you install Revit 2018. And there's a What's New option right there inside of Help, and it'll tell you a lot of the previous release features as well. So if you don't want to wait for us to do a webinar on it, you can certainly jump in and do that as well. So a lot of features here. The way I'm going to run today's presentation is I'm going to talk about a lot of the general enhancements up front, and then I'm going to start talking about some of the architectural enhancements, structural, and then mechanical and kind of fabrication-y stuff near the end. So, and just in case you're wondering kind of how this is going to run, that's what I'm going to do in this presentation. So Autodesk is always kind of having some things when they do releases of their new software. In this case, they're trying to strengthen the whole workflow inside of Revit. They're trying to modernize the interface a little bit, and you'll see some examples of that. They want to really streamline the creation process and help different disciplines connect. That's kind of been an overarching theme throughout all of their workflows in all their new releases. But in the case of Revit here, a lot of the slides I'm going to be showing you kind of focus on those major aspects here. So let's talk about some of the platform tools and what's going to really be a key set of features for you guys. One of the biggest things for pretty much all of us, I looked at kind of a cross-section of who's attending today. In that list, I'm seeing a lot of companies who collaborate with outside firms, and a lot of those outside firms don't necessarily use Revit all the time. We've got people who are using like SprintCAD that's based on AutoCAD. We're using companies who are, working with Bentley-type products or whatever, right? There's all different BIM authoring solutions out there. And when that happens, you can't link those models and get a lot of intelligence out of them. There was the IFC transfer stuff from previous releases, and that was great, but that didn't really get us everything we wanted. Now what you can do is you can take a coordination model directly from Navisworks, so somebody can create an NWC file, kick that out, and then you can take those NWC files and link them back into Revit. And they also leverage a lot of that coordination, the shared coordinate type processes. So as long as the Navisworks model is assembled correctly, you should be able to bring that directly into Revit and leverage the shared coordinates and get the models to link up and line up, and then also run collisions inside of Revit directly, and get nice sliced views of models. Unlike the AutoCAD imports that a lot of us work with, AutoCAD doesn't really let you cut the model very well. With these Navisworks models, it's going to give you a real quality cut of the model, and even have some of the visibility graphics controls that you wouldn't necessarily have with other types of workflows like IFC or AutoCAD. So great tool set here, great feature that's been added to the Revit 2018 environment. Another really cool thing here is the ability to groups. I know a lot of you out there work with unitized plans. So you've got a lot of groups of content you're dropping in for, residential unit A, A1, B, B1, whatever, all those different types of groups, and you've got all the equipment and content you want inside that group. Well, scheduling instances of those groups has been tricky. What a lot of us have done is we've taken either an area and leveraged areas, which is extra work, or we've taken the walls that surround those units and we've told them that they don't bound rooms, so we have one big room that floods, but then you can't get unit by unit rooms, and it's kind of annoying. Well, with these groups here, you can actually schedule them now. And you have the ability to add parameters to groups if you want as well. So if you wanted unit-specific information that you wanted to enter, or maybe you're doing, medical facilities and you wanted, how many patient rooms of this type do I have, but you've got sub-rooms inside of that, you can leverage this to actually group that content. Now, I haven't really seen any reports on this yet, but I'm going to warn all of you again about groups. If you haven't heard this before, groups really tend to not like being mirrored. So if you do have a left-hand and a right-hand variation of this, I recommend creating a left-hand group and a right-hand group, dropping it in, giving it a specific instance name or type name rather, so that you can schedule that cleanly, so you know it's a left-hand or right-hand option. But yeah, you can get all the basic properties here of how many there are of certain instances, what the names are, if it's room bounding or not. And another thing you can schedule, by the way, is links, Revit links specifically. You can't schedule DWG links or DWG imports yet, but you can schedule Revit links, and that's pretty cool because now you can start to find out if there's more than one insertion of a link in your model very quickly through this schedule. If there was a Revit link, perhaps that was copied once in the model or a couple of times in the model. Or maybe you're using links as units, and so you can leverage a linked unit multiple times and, again, get that quantity of which ones you're dealing with. So that's pretty cool. Now, over here in the global parameters, I'm not going to show this feature necessarily, but there are some new to global parameters. Those of you leveraging these, you've been asking for radius and diameter dimensions to be controlled. Some hold dimensions and some flexible labels out there. So this has all been added to global parameters. I would encourage you to take a look at that. Overall, global parameters are pretty cool, but I'm personally, I'm going to give you some opinions in today's presentation. Personally, I'm still struggling with certain things about global parameters across the board. There's certain values I'd like to link up, and I can't. So as far as dimensions go, it's really powerful and really cool. As far as linking to specific, objects like room objects or something, you still can't do that as far as I can tell. But they have added quite a bit of constraint possibilities for dimensions, which is awesome. This here was probably one of my favorite new features. In addition to the Navisworks models, the ability here to acquire coordinates from georeferenced drawing files. Most of us, when we're working with an architectural site model, and that's how you should be working, as an architectural site model, and then you link your architectural building into that site model and you publish coordinates to it. Well, while working in that architectural site model, getting the coordinates specified was always a big hassle, right? The structural or civil engineer had to give you a certain file, export it with certain data, with an AutoCAD tag that told you the northing, easting, and elevation, and then you had to do all kinds of steps inside of your file to get it to work out. This process here, now with the georeferencing, is actually pretty sweet, and it's really simple. All you have to do is acquire the coordinates from the drawing file as long as it's positioned correctly in that site file, and then when you link your architectural building in, you can just publish coordinates to it, and it's no problem. It's a super simple workflow. In fact, this one is one that I want to show you guys so you can kind of see how simple this actually is. Now I'm going to jump over into Revit here, Revit 2018, and I'm going to start a brand new file here. So there's actually a new feature here. The interface has changed ever so slightly. Instead of having the big application menu being the file menu, to kind of align with the new sort of interface standards, there's actually a file tab in Revit that replaces the big R that used to be up there. So slight difference there, but that is a change. So file, new, and I'm going to do a new project here and create a new architectural project real quick. Now, what I would normally do is get this file all set up, probably have a site model template that I would want to use. In this case, I'm just going to link a drawing file real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a CAD link into this file, and I'm going to browse to where I've got this saved, which I believe, do I have a shortcut? I should. I don't have a shortcut. Well, that's wonderful. Let me go out here to my D drive where I've got some of this content saved, and I've got some 2018 files that are already saved inside of here. And here's a little site file that I know has some georeferencing in it. And it's pretty easy to acquire this from a civil team because most of their files are already georeferenced, and if they're not, they can enable that pretty quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this site file. Just use some standard import processes here where I'm going to do things like bringing it in as black and white and positioning it. When I'm bringing in a site file, I pretty much always just do center to center because origin to origin never works with a properly georeferenced file. So I'm just going to drop this in center to center, unchecking the lines that are off axis. But this is a civil file, so I certainly don't want to have it correcting any lines in there. They're all accurate to the site, and I don't want to be messing with that. And I want this to come in as a 3 object, so not current view only. So I'm going to bring this in real quick. This is going to drop in here. This does still have some ActiveX objects coming from Civil 3D, and that's fine. It's still going to have some graphics out here that I can use. And as long as I can see this file, it's dropped in, I'm probably going to make sure it's in place. So I usually will come up here and pin it right away, just so I don't accidentally move it. Once this is here, I can leverage this for generating my topography. I can drop in my building, elevate it correctly, all that jazz. But the real key thing here is that I can select this DWG and go over here into properties. And instead of having to go to collaborate and manage my coordinates up here, rather manage my shared coordinates up here and acquire stuff, hopefully correctly, usually not. Usually what I have to do is turn on my site markers out here and move them around and set them to a known coordinate on the site, and it's just trouble. The new process is you click the site file, you go over here to where it says not shared for the shared site, and you tell it that I want to up the coordinates from this DWG. And it's going to define in my file a default location. I can click reconcile here, and in my model now, I have the coordinates saved. Done. It's acquired them from the drawing file. It's that simple. It's super easy. Now, I haven't done a whole lot of testing with this myself yet, so those of you who have seen our process from before, our internal team is going to go through and do quite a bit of testing on this to make sure that it's perfect, but it seems so far, after my initial preliminary testing, like this is working super smoothly. So your ability to go in there and grab those shared coordinates, nice, easy, and clean. Just over here, shared site, and acquiring the coordinates from that linked DWG file. Do that once on your site file, and you're basically done for the rest of the project. Your other models link into here, you publish the coordinates, nice and easy. So Revit 2018 is really improving that whole workflow of bringing in linked DWG info and getting the coordinates. All right, let me tab back over here to the presentation. Where is it? There it is. It's not showing up. There it goes. All right. Also, cross-model tool that's been brought in here is 3D componentry. Now, those of you on the MEP side and some of you on the architectural side, this is going to be huge because you can now grab any 3D modeled content from pretty much any source, bring it into Revit, and you can now begin dimensioning off of that, snapping information to it. In the case of MEP, in a family environment, you can actually host connectors directly to a DWG component, something you could not do before. Now, they're still not flexible, right? You still can't flex that imported geometry. It's not real Revit graphics, but there's a lot more control there where you can dimension off of it, ask it questions, and then leverage that for other information. In fact, quick example of this for you. I'm going to toggle back into Revit again. Let's see here. Revit 2018. I'm going to make a brand new family file. So just a little MEP example for you. New family. We'll do a piece of mechanical equipment here real quick. So I guess right there. And I'm going to import here. You can't link a DWG into a family, but you can import it. So I'm going to import some CAD content here. And I believe I have, instead of a DWG actually, I'm going to use, I believe it's a solid file. Yeah, an SAT file that was exported from some other modeling tool. Maybe it was Inventor, I don't know, maybe it was SolidWorks, who cares? It was an SAT file here. So there's a lot of new file types you can actually bring in, SAT and SketchUp models being two of them. I'm going to bring in this air handling unit, importing it as if it's mechanical equipment right here, so it's going to act like the rest of the mechanical equipment in my model, visibility graphics-wise. And then from this view here, let's say on this left-hand side, this is my intake of a supply air connection. I'm going to go ahead and place the dimension out there real quick. So aligned dimension, let's see, zoom in. I can actually dimension to the faces of this DWG, the solid faces, and I can assign parameters to this. I have tested this as a reporting parameter. It's like to be reporting. It won't let me link that to anything because it still doesn't consider this a host, and that's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and set this up as a type property and call this supply air in width, and I'll just click OK here. From a front elevation view, I'll do something similar. Zoom extent, and I'm going to go to the left-hand side over here and put another dimension out there real quick. Dimension the height of this guy, and so we'll add a parameter for this. Supply air in height. If I could spell, that would be super awesome. Let's see, height, there we go. All right, and it's going to, again, be a type parameter. Now, because I can't flex this, I'm going to protect this model a little bit from an end user trying to go in here and change these values. I'm just going to set it at least 1.5 feet here and 2 feet here so it locks it down, and that way an end user can't touch this. This isn't a parametric family just because it's not really, it's a DWG import or an SAT import. It's not that smart. But I do have this other ability here. If I go to my 3D view Now that I've got that left and right of this model here, I can see those dimensions kind of floating out there in space. What I'm going to do is create a connector, a duct connector, something I could not do before. I'm going to host that to this face of this piece of equipment, and I'm going to link up its properties now. I've asked the model what its information is, so I'm going to take the height and link it up to the height, so it'll snap to the correct height property there, and it centers itself on that face, which is pretty cool. Linking it up to the width, again, still stays centered on that face. So now I can actually use this component. Of course, I'd want to hook up other parameters as well, but I can now use this connection and this graphic out here without having to do any extra real modeling, just asking it some dimensions and then tying it to my connectors. So again, real powerful workflow here. There was a question that did pop through, by the way, that said, when I was talking about the CAD file imports, do they still have to have their extents within a 20-mile radius? And the answer is, yeah. It's actually 25, I believe, but yeah, you need to be within 25 miles. So if you do insert an AutoCAD file origin to origin, this is, again, taking a step back here to that DWG site. Let me go back to my PowerPoint here. That pop up on screen. So this georeferencing here, sorry, I didn't see that question a little earlier. This georeferencing, when you do link this in, you do have to be within the 25-mile radius. If you do origin to origin and it exceeds that, Revit will automatically center that DWG on screen. So again, like I'd mentioned for the site files, I generally just center them on screen anyway because Revit's going to do it. And then once I get it positioned where I want, I pin it in place and then I don't ever move it. So yeah, you're still limited by that. The question from another individual was, is the SketchUp model support new or improved? I believe that's new. I don't think I saw that back in the 2017 original release. It might have been a 2017 point release new feature. I don't remember seeing it before. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's new. And then the air handling unit that I just brought in here with that next little process here, the SAT, that's actually a 3D model, and it doesn't have a built-in 2D representation for this. So when I go to a floor plan representation, for example, this is showing me all of that solid geometry out there. If I did set this to like a hidden line graphic, I would see somewhat of a 2D graphic, but it's not automatically 2D. It is truly the 3D elements that are being regenerated in screen. Now, Revit is actually pretty efficient with regenerating 3D graphics in plan view. I still try to go ahead and have a 2D graphic for these pieces of content when I bring them in. So I would take this object here and probably hide it in a plan view if I can. In this case, it doesn't look like I have those visibility settings over here to be able to do that, unfortunately. But it would be nice to be able to hide that in a plan view and then just put 2D graphics out here. So there might be some limitations on this. I mean, I'm not going to use this for every piece of content. I'm usually going to try to model it myself from scratch if I can, but I can't always do that. There was another comment in here, again, referencing back to the site side about civil engineers currently working in Civil 3D because Revit isn't efficient for them. And no, Revit is not a site civil modeling tool, right? It's not for civil engineers. I use the site model in Revit for coordination purposes. And it's an architectural site model. So still not a civil engineering tool. I don't think Revit will ever, I usually get really hesitant with using the word ever, but I don't think Revit's intent will ever be to be a site modeling tool. That's Civil 3D's world. There might be other tools on the civil side like InfraWorks that might expand into that realm, but Revit itself is not really a Civil 3D tool, not civil engineers. So it's a tool that you can use architecturally for coordination, for graphics, for rendering, for site coordination, but that's really all it's for, is for the architects to kind of dabble and play, mechanical engineers to dabble and play a bit there as well, but not really for civil engineers. All right. Let's kind of continue with the presentation here. I got very little time left. We're still kind of moving forward. So documentation enhancements here. We're seeing the multidisciplinary stuff. Cool new stuff for text. Those of you who use symbols like centerline, angle, degrees, you've probably had to go in there and remember the ASCII key code, or you have to have the character map up on screen all the time. Well, in Revit 2018, they've added this great new feature where you no longer have to do that. It's built right in. Let me shut this family down real quick here. And I'm going to go back to my project. I have an architectural, oops, not this guy. I should have an architectural file here open. And there we go. Out here on the floor plan, what I'm going to do is drop in a piece of text. So just basic text, nothing special here. and 1/8 inch aerial, nothing super spectacular. I'm going to go ahead and put in here something about, let's see, temperature, variation, 10 degrees, right? I normally would do something like 10 degrees or plus or minus 10 degrees. Well, what I really want to do is I want to have a plus minus symbol right here from Windows ASCII codes to keep my text length down. So you can right click on this, you can go to symbols, and then there's like the plus minus sign right there. So you don't have to know what the ASCII key code is. And maybe for the degrees symbol over here, I want to go through and say, I don't want to have DEG, I want to have the actual degree symbol. So I can right click again and do something like the degree sign. So all these controls here, the typical ones that many of us use, that's available right from a right click when you're typing text in. You can also click other. This will bring up the character map, but it's a little faster shortcut than having to go through Windows to get it. In this case, I can just go, yeah, degree sign, or whatever other ASCII code it is I want to use out here. So that's cool. It's a nice little feature there to be able to get access to the symbols a whole lot more rapidly. There was a question, by the way, about what CPU and GPU I'm using. I'm actually using a laptop. I'm using let's see, I don't know what the CPU is. I think it's i7 something mid-range. It's just a basic MSI laptop here with an NVIDIA GTX 960M graphics card on here. So it's nothing super spectacular. It's just it's a good workstation replacement laptop. I probably wouldn't use this in production, but it does work quite well for the files that I take a look at for you guys. Send me your models to review them. All right, let's take a look here at the features for architecture specifically here. So multi-story stairs have been revisited by Autodesk. And this is really cool because now multi-story stairs actually have the ability to vary what their level-to-level heights happen to be. And they automatically update their railings pretty well. And you can do a railing modification level by level if you need to, but you can tell it to manage these stairs across the entire height of the building, and it'll just do it. You just automatically attach stairs to levels. In fact, in my building model, and I do a lot of these tests for you guys in our own building over here. So this is the building that CTC usually uses as a demo, and I upgraded this from Revit Teen just a couple of weeks ago into Revit 2018, and I took my little stair tower over here that I was using as multi-stair demonstrations. You can see I've got 14-foot heights for most of my building, but going down into the sub-level, the basement level, it's got a 12-foot height between levels. And with the multi-story stairs, that never really worked out very well. I didn't know how to adjust those stairs. So I took my stair with my railings, just the default stuff that I'd modeled in previous versions of Revit way back in 2015, and I told it that I wanted to do a multi-story stair off this guy, and so I selected some levels. So I went through and picked my upper levels to see if those would work, and they worked really well. But then I picked my basement level that had some oddball dimension right there. And when I told it to go ahead and build this, it actually created those stairs, maintained it of my landing, and adjusted the height of my stair, and did a pretty decent job of modeling my railing as well. So you guys can actually leverage these multi-story stairs now much more readily than having to make multiple stair sets that attach to different multi-stories or modeling them all manually. Because we all know that in architecture, our levels from level to level are never really an exact dimension. They vary throughout the building. It's just going to happen. But you can set some cool things across the entire set of this multi-story stair now, the overall tread depth, and there's some type properties you can modify as well. But this is really cool, this new multi-story stair ability. That's great. Also, with these multi-story stairs, enhancements to railings to go along with that. Now, last release, we had railings that could attach to the tops of walls. So if the wall top changed, you can change the railings. And now with the enhanced multi-story stairs, there's some enhancements to railings that work with stair towers nicely. But there's also another really cool feature here. Those of you who do a lot of site modeling inside of Revit, and you do fence work across the site, railings themselves have not been able to be hosted to topo surfaces. So we had to kind of fake that with tops of walls in the last release. Well, now railings can directly attach to topo surfaces. So as you're modeling a site, and as the site contours change, as you're kind of dabbling around with new conditions, your railings can be attached to that and automatically update accordingly. So there was a question about the stairs specifically. I said, did it adjust the risers and the treads? It actually did adjust the tread counts, and it did adjust in a minute way the actual riser heights. So there's a maximum riser height that Revit can set. in commercial side, I believe it's like 6.5 inches or something, or 7.5 inches for the riser height default. It will guarantee that it won't go over that, but it will kind of adjust the riser heights automatically as needed to give you the right quantity of treads to go up to the next level. So yeah, it does do some of that adjustment. And obviously, you can take a look at those things yourself in your models and kind of see how it works for you guys in your settings. And I was corrected. It's not 7.5 inches commercial. It's 7 inches commercial. So great deal there. Alrighty, let's take a look at some of the structural features here. I'm going to show one of these, again, running short on time here, so I'm going to show one of these features. There are a ton of new steel connection types. If you're using advanced steel add-in with Revit, or the app with Revit, then you get a ton of interoperability there as well. But there's over 100 new types of steel connections with the advanced steel plugin. There's 2 new major categories. There's purlins and cold rolled. In fact, that just organizes your library a little more cleanly for the actual sections. And there's also a miscellaneous category there. This new version of Revit 2018 was really designed around the level of development 350. And I think in this case, the LOD they're talking about is level of detail, but level of development 350 is kind of the real technical term here, where you can get a lot more detail in the Revit environment, and it's a bit more automatic. And part of that is due to, let me get over here, just jumping ahead just a little bit, a lot of it's due to this ability between Revit and Advanced Steel. There's 130 new parametric connections that come along with Advanced Steel as well. So there's 100 that come with Revit and 130 additional that are going along with Advanced Steel that really allow you to transfer the model back and forth. So you can do a lot of extra detailing in Advanced Steel, bring that information back into Revit, do modeling and manipulation in Revit, and shoot that back over to Advanced Steel. So great new feature set there for a lot of that. And also, if you guys are using custom sections or custom shapes that you're developing, possibly on the concrete side even, you can do a lot of interoperability between those as well. I'm backing up a couple of steps here. There's some new really slick priorities in steel, so you can tell Revit what's the priority element, what's the secondary elements by number, and then it'll actually help you with those steel connections to automatically cut them back and not let steel shapes interfere with each other, which is pretty slick. So those of you on the steel detailing side, the steel fabrication and detailing side, these are going to be some great new features for your teams. Again, steel connections are available for custom sections as well. The ability to actually tag and identify different steel shapes, and also the ability with those connection details to set and run code checks against the actual steel settings themselves. So all about the steel detailing side, steel modeling side here in this release of Revit 2018. Again, with the fabrication, and every release of Revit so far from, I think, 2013, 2014 has been working with rebar and structural reinforcement. And now I know not a lot of you do this, but those of you who do have a need to get in there and get to this fabrication level and planning out where exact rebar components go, this is real slick. There's a new feature that lets you work with irregular faces and to automatically read host changes. So if you're changing a shape, if you're remodeling a part of a beam, if you have a wavy edge on a floor slab, this can automatically read that. In fact, this is an example that I did want to show you guys real quick for those of you who are interested in the steel side. I'm going to make a brand new file here, just a new structural file, not family, project, thank you. And we'll do a quick structural template. And I'm going to do something, and I'm air quoting over here, you can't see it, quoting architectural, something architectural that you may have to deal with, you may have already had to deal with. Create, and let me do this from the structural side here. Cancel my floor sketch there. Structural floor, and I'm going to tell the structural floor that it is going to be, let's say, a 6-inch concrete floor or something. And I'm just going to make some basic rectangle out here, and we'll do something fun on the edge. That fun is also in air quotes, just in case you can't tell. So we'll do some splined edging over here because, you know, architecture and stuff. So I'm going to finish this floor, and I'm going to cut a section through it real quick so you guys can, you know, see that I'm going to drop in some rebar directly. So from this view, I'll drop in some rebar. It's going to give me a little rebar editing over here. So I'm going to grab my rebar shape. and I'm going to tell it that I want to have this be, let's see, a maximum spacing here of, let's say, 6 inches. And I'm going to drop in this rebar component out here on this edge. All right, so hopefully it did what I asked it to do. Go into a 3D view, and yeah, you can see there it's got the maximum spacing. I can drag this along the entire edge of that floor. But this is the real slick part right here. I can tell it that this is a varying rebar set because by default it'll automatically just rectangular fill. When I say it's varying, it automatically reads the edge of that floor out there. So now as a structural engineer or as an architect, if somebody goes in there and modifies this floor and changes that spline shape to do something newly artistic, having had to go through and manually modify every single one of those components of rebar as you're placing them in that floor, automatically update that on the fly. So real slick new features there for the rebar componentry. This also, by the way, when you are leveraging some of the imported objects. So I can import some CAD content and not CAD content, well, yeah, CAD content. I can bring in CAD content as a part of an in-place modeled structural column or pier or something, and then add that rebar to that as well, and it'll still follow those imported objects as well. It's pretty slick. There are some other really powerful graphical 3D constraints for these rebar and 3D views. You catch these to like SAT imports or InfraWorks imports, as I mentioned. So you can take like an InfraWorks bridge model, bring that in, and start doing some structural reinforcement on that. All right. Again, running long on time here, but hopefully this is full for you guys. Let's talk about some MEP content here for design and fabrication. Closed loop hydronic analysis. You who do a lot of hydronic work, Revit doesn't work very well, didn't work very well with the hydronic closed loop systems. It didn't do pressure drops properly. It didn't calculate head on the actual flow properly. And in this case, with the closed loops, you can actually enable that. In fact, I'm going to show you in Revit real quick where that can be done. Jumping over here to Revit, I'm going to tab over to my mechanical file that I have open. This is a part of an example from one of our buildings on the mechanical side. There we go. In here, I'm going to go to Manage, MEP Settings, and there is Mechanical Settings right here. And from here, you can go down to your calculations and take a look at this analysis for closed loop systems. So you can just check the box. It'll enable it. If you want to know more about it, there's a little bit of information here that tells you how that's actually being calculated. Of course, you can still modify your pressure drop information here, and I believe there was a change to the pressure drop. There was a pressure drop that was dropped off the list, and they went over to the Colebrook as the default, if I recall correctly, for the pressure drop information. So take a look at that a little bit yourselves as well on your plumbing side and piping side if you are using calculations in Revit or you want to use calculations in Revit. There is a lot of new information here. And by the way, these calculations for the piping all happens in the background. Used to be when you'd make a change, it would pop up a little process on screen that would spin by and say, hey, I'm updating your pressure drop information or your flow information. Now this all happens in the background, which is pretty sweet as well. So background calculations. This was one that I thought was real slick here, was the, oh, sorry, I'm going to talk about the next one in just a minute here. Where'd it go? Pressure drop flow. Oh, that is the one that I wanted. Yeah. In early stages of building modeling, you don't necessarily want to commit to a hard connection to pieces of equipment or hard connections to plumbing fixtures or to piping objects or whatever, because we all know the architecture model might still be in flux, and so you may want to get an analytical connection to this, but have still get the data but not have to actually drop pipe down to those objects. In this case here, you can see some hydronic radiators down here that are in a closed loop type system, and they're theoretically or logically connected to the pipe. So it'll get the information, it'll know what the load is, and it'll total up that load throughout the system and bring it back down to the object, but it doesn't have to be physically connected. So if this thing moves or assigns to a new hosted wall or whatever in the model, it still retains that analytical connection. So it's great during early design, early iteration. This is going to be really powerful. Now this only works on the piping side. This does not work on the HVAC side with the ductwork. So just so you guys are aware, it's piping only for that, that analytical type connection. Inside here also, there's a modification to building and space analysis, and this is actually pretty big. You know, CTC, we have a productivity pack that we put out, and we built in the outdoor airflow ASHRAE table 62.1 information into Revit, into our spaces, but the new 2018 release actually has that built in by default. In fact, there's another new feature in 2018 that's pretty slick here. I'm actually going to open up those settings for you real quick. MEP settings, building and space type settings. Now, you could get to these before in 2018, but there's a little bit of a difference here. Let me pull 2017 to the foreground here as well. So I've got 2017 and its window pulled up right here, and I've got 2018's pulled up over here to the right. And in 2017, you'll notice that I don't have down here the outdoor air per person, outdoor air per area, the air changes per hour, and the outdoor air method. So for the building type, you have these settings, and for space types, you also have those outdoor airflow type settings right there. Another major feature that's in this list is, you know, a lot of you have called us up and said, hey, I don't like the building types or space types that they've given me. I want to make my own. Well, in 2017 and before, you couldn't do that. But in 2018, you actually have the ability to make brand new space type and building type definitions, duplicate ones that are there and modify them, and then maintain and manage what you want those settings to be. So for those of you on the MEP side doing kind of engineering calculations, this is going to be fantastic for you guys, the ability to actually do outdoor airflow calcs and the ability to kind of set your own room and space types, building types and space types. So that'll be, I think, a fantastic feature for those of you working in MEP. Also, electrically, we finally got some love on our circuit. This one I'm not going to have time to show just because we're running way long on time, but circuit pathways, the intended routing for circuits in 3D throughout the building. This is key because now you can actually do more appropriate voltage drops. It's not just a straight line, shortest distance possible. You can actually control some of the wire routing or the circuit routing through the building. This isn't an actual physical object. This isn't like conduit or actual wire. It's just the logical information about the circuits. You can get more info. So you can't still run collision detection on this, but you could run your conduit in the same path if you wanted to, manually. But this is nice, though, because, again, you are now able to get a lot more voltage drop and wire load type properties off of the Revit model itself. So 2018 might be a great feature, a great release for those of you on the electrical side, especially for some of your load analysis and panel calculations. So I'm going to whip through these last couple here. We've got MEP fabrication improvements. Autodesk has been focusing very heavily on the LOD 400, the level of development 400, which is the fabrication level. And they've got Fab EST and Fab MEP tools out there that are designed for fabricating information directly out of your Revit model or getting ready to fabricate out of your Revit model. The default content's pretty horrible. It's pretty, you know, basic. It's level 300 at best. But the fabrication stuff, this stuff here, this is a lot more detailed. It's got a lot more information in here. But previous versions did not have the ability to slope fabrication parts. You couldn't get an accurate fabrication model 100% when there was sloping involved. Here, you can actually slope content. And the really cool thing is components that are supposed to be flat, like, you know, riser pipes, for example, and the connections off of those, you can set those to always be vertical or flat versus the actual sloping horizontal runs that have to run down to a piece of equipment or away from a piece of equipment. That can be told to slope. So there's a lot of user-definable settings out here that are nice and powerful for you guys on the fabrication side. Also, they've added in a bit easier routing here with multi-point routing for the fabrication content. So you can actually click through the model and draw, instead of just one segment at a time, you can actually draw multiple segments with this multi-point routing. And you can choose settings that are important for things like elbows versus taps, and it'll understand how to, taps or T's, so it'll understand how to actually create those components when you're working in the fabrication environment. All right, guys, a ton of settings inside here in Revit. There's all kinds of features that have been added across the board. I couldn't talk about all of them. There's a few other really cool ones here that I thought were great. High-resolution monitor support. So those of you on the 4K monitors, those are supported much more readily now. Those of you working in Dynamo Player's been built in directly into Revit. There's tons of improvements. LED lighting content was actually added for the electrical side, and also architecturally, so you can get proper rendering of LED lights out of the box. Great set of features, tons of components, tons of new things that are kind of hidden in the background. But certainly dig in, take a look, and if you wanted us to go through more detail, again, like I mentioned, give us feedback as you exit today's presentation so that we can answer those types of requests and do another webinar that digs deeper into a certain area that you have interest in.